Greetings, everyone, and welcome to a special online event today. It's called 4 Factors People 100 Years and Older Share for Longevity and Radiant Living. My name is Stephen Dinan. I'm the founder and CEO of the Shift Network, and I'm really personally fascinated by today's conversation because I've internally set the intention to live to at least 100 in a vibrant and healthy way. So I really want to know what's the latest science on how to do that. And we're going to get to dive deep into this subject with one of the world's preeminent pioneers. His name is Dr. Mario Martinez. He's the founder of the Biocognitive Science Institute and the author of the Mind-Body Code. Welcome, Dr. Martinez.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Well, we're super excited to dive in. I do want to let everybody know up front, we're going to have a chance to go much deeper into this in a very practical and very important new course that Dr. Martinez is going to be teaching. We'll share a little bit about that towards the end of the hour. So I'm going to transition to Mario just to make it easier, but honoring that you are a doctor and that we should honor that. But Mario, I'd love for you to share a little bit of your personal backstory now of why you have become so committed to researching the frontiers of healthy aging and really living vibrantly beyond 100.
Well, and my training in neuropsychology, clinical neuropsychology, was fairly reductionistic, as most medicine has been, in that the idea was that if you have long telomeres or if you have good genes in your family, you're going to live long, and if you don't, then you're not. So I wanted to test that. I wanted to see what it was all about, and I started studying centenarians, people who are over 100, but especially centenarians who are healthy, because I think longevity has to be a wellness longevity. And after studying many of them, I began to see that it was not genetics. In fact, genetics accounts to about maybe 20-25% tops. It's not what they eat, it's not the exercise. So the usual things that we attribute to longevity are necessary, but not sufficient to really identify what it is that these people are doing. And I looked at different cultures to see if it was a cultural component. Some eat meat, some don't. And what I found is that 4 universals, which is what I'll be talking about, of ways of perceiving the world, of ways of interpreting the world. So you could eat well, you could exercise, you could meditate, you could have good thoughts, but the most important component is what is your interpretation of the world? How do you deal with joy? How do you deal with losses? How do you deal with adversity? And those are the components that I find that are so important. That's what I'll be sharing. So the good news is that we can change the way that we view ourselves. And I propose that longevity is culturally learned. It's not genetics.
It's a fascinating thesis, and I'm really fascinated to dive into the different aspects for you. But I'd love for you to maybe start, before you even go into the 4 factors, maybe give an example or two from your research in different cultures of somebody who is embodying this better perceptual pattern and consciousness that leads to a vibrant time after 100.
Yes, and I think I'm glad you said that, because the best way to get a complex construct or scientific component is to tell a story or to give examples. And I'll give you an example on one of the factors, which is how they perceive time. One centenarian that I interviewed had a vegetable garden. He was 101. So I complimented him. I said, well, this is really a very nice vegetable garden. And he said, yes, but wait till you see it in 3 years. So the perception of time is that they have all the time in the world. And what that does in a neuropsychological way is that the brain will do a projection of time and space, and it takes you away from that fear of the urgent present and the fear of not having enough time. It reduces your stress hormones, but it allows you to live a life of creativity and plenitude that is very important. So that's a very practical component. And many people, and the culture, by the way, sets it up in a totally different way. You'll hear people say, how are you doing? Oh, I'm doing okay for my age, with whatever is left, or middle age having to be the second part of your life. All of that fabric creates biosymbols that are either positive toward longevity or actually they reduce the longevity probability.
So we're kind of like subtly programming ourselves to a scarcity of time or a finitude in our future versus like that more abundance of time stretching before us. That's fascinating. Do you have another story that helps to illuminate some of the core shifts?
Yes, I think that another important component is that they have rituals. And a ritual is much more important than a routine, for example. A routine would be you take a shower because you want to stay clean. A ritual is something that you do that has a certain amount of identity with self and with your culture. You look forward to it and you never abuse it. So I went to Cuba to study centenarians a few years ago. And this woman who was I think about 102, I asked her in a way that wouldn't bias it and make it sound like I was looking for a ritual. I said, what are things that are important to you in your life that you do, that you look forward to, that give you a sense of identity and it gives you pleasure? And immediately she said, well, I have a shot of rum before I go to sleep. So at the time I thought it's got to be the Cuban rum. It's got to be reductionistic. I have to look at the qualities. Then I asked another one the next day and I asked him the same question. And he said, I have a cigar. First time when I wake up in the morning, I have a cigar. So I thought Cuban rum and Cuban cigars, that will do it. Till finally, I realized that it was the ritual is what has the immunological enhancement, the ritual of what you do. And none of them abuse their rituals. You don't abuse what you love, you abuse what you need. So I would push limits and I say, why don't you have another shot of rum? No, that's all I want. That's all I want. Another cigar? No, that's what pleases me. That's all I want. So I couldn't find any centenarians that had any kind of addictions. Because the rituals allow you to stay within parameters of what Aristotle called the mean, the middle ground. And that was also fascinating to see that ritual is one of the ways to trigger the causes of health, one of the ways to enhancing the causes of health.
Well, it sounds like it's a little counterintuitive. So we're so entrained that like smoking being bad, but the ritual, the positive enjoyment of in a limited way might actually really be additive. That's a fascinating insight. So maybe share a little bit more about the pleasure aspect. So the way that pleasure is ritualized, because I think oftentimes we don't think of ritual as being oriented to pleasure necessarily, but that sounds like it's a really key component.
Yes, and that's really an excellent point because there is a difference. You can have hedonic pleasure, which is a pleasure for pleasure in itself, like Aristotle said, or you can have a pleasure that has more meaning, what he called the eudaimonia. And that pleasure is the pleasure that you have that is not just the physicality of the pleasure, but is an existential, sometimes even a spiritual value that allows you to really pick up the essence of what pleasure is all about. If you keep it at the physical level, it has one set of benefits. If you go beyond that and go to the existential level and to the level that it brings meaning is very important in life, then it has a greater enhancement toward longevity. So that's a great question that you asked.
Well, we're kind of leading into some of these 4 categories, but why don't we lay them out explicitly so people can see kind of on the meta level, like what are these 4 common things? And then we can talk a little bit about how to build that into our lives.
What is the common denominator in people that live a long life and they're healthy? One of them, the first one, as I mentioned earlier, is the time consciousness. Time consciousness is one. The other one is health consciousness. The other one is aging consciousness. And very, very interesting is self-love consciousness. And each one of them has powers that we know psychoneurologically now how thoughts and emotions affect the immune, nervous, and endocrine system that are enhancing, actually. They trigger or they enhance the causes of health. And in gerontology, the conventional gerontology studies the illnesses of aging. I study the causes of health in the process of growing older. So those are the 4.
Well, let's dive into each of those and explain a little bit about how they emerge, what tends to reinforce them, and how they, and what the result in the body of each of those 4 factors.
Starting with the time, which is a really important one, the time factor, and especially in our modern society, people are multitasking. They never have time for anything. So what are they doing to their mind body? Living that way, you're telling the body, I don't have time, so I have to speed things up. You have cortisol, norepinephrine, epinephrine, all of the things that are immune suppressors because of the fight or flight. Fight or flight is that if you're in something of a danger or something that's urgent, the immune system will shut down the digestion and all the other things that are the repair work that is doing until you fix that, and then it goes back. But if you're living in the urgent present, then what's happening is you're on high alarm all the time. So you're depleting the possibilities of enhancing your wellness and longevity. And what centenarians do is they always have time in the world. And I will teach the methods that you can use for each. And the one simple one that I use myself is that if I'm rushed, I think of Cervantes in his book of Don Quixote de la Mancha. His assistant, Sancho Panza, would help him put on his armor. So he would say, Sancho, dress me slowly, I'm in a hurry. So that mantra alone will shift your consciousness and that you have to slow down rather than speed up when you're having to do something. That will change your consciousness, and it'll gradually, and other techniques, of course, get you into a point that I have all the time in the world. Because you see, time doesn't contribute anything. Time is an affordance. Time is a duration of space. We can't have anything without time. There's no space without time. Before the Big Bang, there was no time. But now that there's time, it's only an affordance. It allows for the measurement of the duration of space. So when people say time is money, time will cure everything, no, it doesn't do anything. Your agency, your action in the duration of that space is what works. But yet the perception that you make of time is what your biology will read. It's not going to read the time out there. It's going to read your perception of time.
That's truly fascinating. Well, how do you, so one question that comes up around that, are the centenarians that you've studied, have they had really like productive lives, or sometimes they're kind of a little bit more unplugged from the matrix of what sort of everyday, humans are usually up to, with this kind of scurrying, hurrying, and a little bit stressful?
Well, they've had both. Some come from very difficult backgrounds, have been in concentration camps. Some of them have been very successful. So really, they have they're outliers, people that are out of the curve. And these people intuitively do things that allow them to function coming out of a concentration camp or function as a CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. And it's their perception of what's going on rather than what's going on. And that's a very, very important component that I try to teach, which is time is an invitation for you to interpret it. It's not something out there that is fixed. So if they say, for example, well, this wound is going to take 6 weeks to heal, time will heal it. Time's not going to do anything. It's going to be the immune system and your perception of that time that will heal it. If you have an internal sense of control, your wound will heal a lot faster than you have an external sense of control.
Great. Well, let's move on to the second one, which was more of a health consciousness.
To be healthy, it's not necessarily important to have good genes. To be healthy, of course, you have to eat well and you have to be active and all that, but it's more than that. Is their perception that we are basically saying it's not the gene endowment that you have, it's not the environment that you have, it's how you perceive your health and how aware you are of your body. They're very aware of their bodies, and they don't necessarily overuse the medical system. Now, I'm not suggesting that we don't do that, because the medical system is great. But one of them that I interviewed, I asked him, when was the last time you went to a doctor? And he said, well, it was about 70 years ago. And I asked him why. He said, well, I fractured my leg and it was really good. And you haven't gone back? No. And what do your doctors say? And he said very innocently, they're all dead. I don't know. So it's a perception. So that's important, how you perceive your health as something that is endowed, but it needs to be dealt with in owning that endowment. Or another thing about it is a family illness. You're told, well, if you have family illnesses, you have a family illness of diabetes type 2, most likely that's what's going to happen to you. They're outliers. They come from families that have all these illnesses, and they don't develop the illnesses. And one of the techniques that I use is to teach people, if you have diabetes type 2 in the family, look at somebody in the family who didn't die or who lived a long life outside of the diabetes stigma, and you will find that those people are different. They have a different perception of the world, and those are the outliers. So you want to imitate the people that are doing something that works. And some reductionist scientists will say, look, if your father has diabetes and his brother and your sister, then it's in the family. It's a propensity to be expressed depending on what you eat, how you think, the environment that you're in, and you're basically sharing a fishbowl that is opening the propensity for the so-called family illness. So family illness is not a genetic sentencing, it's a propensity to be expressed or not.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like part of where we get a little mixed up then is that we're wanting to sort of go with the averages. Oh, if it's a 60% chance that from family history, then you're sort of like, you start programming yourself, oh, I'm most likely going to get this, versus like, oh, if I just follow the 30% who didn't get it, then I can actually imitate them, and that actually programs your biology to follow suit more.
Very much. And that's an important point, because in medicine and in science, we look at, unfortunately, at the normal curve, and the normal curve has an average and it has standard deviations. And even when you're doing a study, a clinical trial or whatever, and something goes out of the norm, it's excused as a nuisance variable. That's very arrogant. That's where the information is, at the tail. So if you have a particular illness, you're going to be treated with what the average is being treated with, and what the average lifespan and so forth is, rather than looking at the outliers. So a very responsible way to do things is to say, look, you have this illness, and on the average, people live 6 years. On the left side of the curve, they live 2 years. On the right side, people live 10 years. Let's look at that and see what we can do to replicate that and emulate that. That's what needs to happen. That's a responsible way to do medicine and science.
That's a really important perceptual shift. So let's dive into I know we want to cover out like the broad contours here, and then we can dive into some specific areas. So I think aging consciousness, was that the next one?
Yes. Aging consciousness also is independent of where they live. Aging consciousness, what I've done is I've tried to get a synopsis of it, a way of operationalizing it. And it's basically a difference between growing older is a passing of time, and nothing you can do. Growing older is a passing of time. Aging is what you do with that time, with the cultural beliefs that you have assimilated. And that's how they view the world. It's not just a passing of time. You can have, and now a lot of the work, I'm doing some work in Poland and epigenetics, which looks at your biological age. What matters is not how old you are, it's what kind of biological age you have. And the good news is that you can reverse that. So if you're 50 and your biological age is 60, then you're 60 functionally, but that could be changed. That could go back, and you can reverse that. And it doesn't have to be with medications. It has to be with mind-body methods, and of course, some eating well and all these other things. So it's really good news. The science that we're finding now, and the mind-body science and cultural psychoneuroimmunology, epigenetics, is really good, because it's saying that we have agency. We have a choice in what we do in our lives.
So as part of what happens with aging consciousness is that we're not wanting to focus on those things that reinforce a felt sense of being, our age or older. So we're kind of like reinforcing a sense of, oh, I feel like I'm 50, I feel like I'm 40, or whatever it is. So in a little bit, you kind of like, it's where you direct your attention, and how is where you're getting at?
Well, part of it is, and I'll be expanding on this, part of it is what I call the cultural portals, which are mostly cultural, not biological. And the cultures will put you into a portal. They'll have the portal of the infant, the child, the adolescent, the young adult, the middle age, which is really important, and then old age. None of those have very much to do with biology. They're the cultural components that are imposed. So if you are today, let's say middle age is 45, and yesterday is a day before your birthday, you're not middle-aged. But today you're middle-aged, and then the culture will admonish you to dress middle-aged, to look middle-aged, to restrict yourself to middle-aged consciousness, and that the body then begins to follow. So if you say, now that I'm middle-aged, I'm going to go back to school. Oh, no, you can't do that. You got to save your money so you can go retire and then possibly a nursing home or whatever. That is implicitly there. And the reason is that we're not aware that we're in these what I call the fish bowls. And the fishbowl is what's going to determine the way that your body will change. So for example, people that retire, and then they say, now I'm going to do exactly what I want. I'm going to watch the sunset in Florida. I'm going to fish. They live 4 to 5 years, and they start getting sick on the first year, because the shifting of consciousness has gone into the passive pleasure rather than the creativity. The centenarians hardly retire. And you ask them, why aren't you retiring? Why would I retire from something that I love? So that's an important component.
That's interesting. And so part of the pivot then is like around this retirement psychology. It's a little bit more, you just devote more and more of your creative energy to that which really lights you up, rather than, quote, retire as much.
That's right. That's right. Because I can't overemphasize the importance of how culture shapes your longevity and your health and even your looks. Because it happens all the time. You wear a shirt that's not a shirt that somebody who's middle-aged will wear. So why are you wearing that? You want to look like a teenager? And they start bringing you back, and they admonish you back into that portal without you knowing it. And after a while, well, I guess I'm middle-aged. I shouldn't be wearing that, or I shouldn't be going back to school. And all of that has a physiological mind-body process that affects your psychoneuroimmunology. It affects the kinds of peptides and the neuromaps that are created to enhance or to diminish your health and your wellness.
So it sounds like you're pretty strong that in the whole nature versus nurture debate around these things, it's like nurture/culture is really the sort of prime driver of how we do, and then it's very secondary, a lot of our genetics.
Yes, and what I'm bringing to science, it's indisputable that mind and body communicate with each other. You can't argue that anymore. What I'm bringing is that mind and body communicate in a cultural context, and that the brain is cultural, the immune system is culture, because it had to learn that from the consciousness. When we created consciousness and language, it had to interpret language as it did with the senses before. So it is mind, body, culture that allows you then to make the changes.
Great. Well, let's look at the fourth area that centenarians have around self-love.
Self-love. And you'll see again how the culture admonishes. Centenarians have what my mentor, George Sullivan, called a healthy narcissism. And that sounds contradiction in terms, but it's not. Healthy narcissism is that you value yourself very much, but it has an implicit inclusive value. I'll give you an example. One of the centenarians that I interviewed, they're treated like superstars wherever they are, because they are superstars. So they gave him a little cocktail party after I interviewed him, and there were some women around. And he comes up to me and he says, "Have you noticed how the women are in love with me?" Well, that's quite narcissistic. And if it stops there, it's narcissistic and sociopathic. But he said, inclusive, "Have you noticed how beautiful they are?" So they include the other world in their narcissism, and that's extremely healthy. Examples: people who are loved all over the world, superstars, they hurt themselves, they live a very terrible life because they don't truly believe that they're loved for who they are. So it's more important to believe that you're loved than to actually be loved. What you believe is what your biology will do. People could tell you, "I love you, you're so wonderful, you're great, you're wonderful." And if your self-esteem is not one that can accept the gift, forget it. It's not going to do any good.
So I think these pivots or shifts in consciousness you're talking about are really so fascinating. And I guess the next question is, like, how do you start to take responsibility for creating them? Since a lot of times people sort of say, "Well, I'm just being authentic," or "That's my programming." So there's a way in which we don't necessarily see a lot of these things as a choice that we're making moment to moment.
Yes, and that has to do with agency. Agency is not used very much in psychology, it's more in anthropology and philosophy, but agency is your action, your choice that you make in a particular outcome. So an example would be that fate, let's say fate is something that happens to you. It's raining or you break your leg. That's fate. Agency takes fate and it can shape it into destiny. But if you are not aware of your agency or you disown your agency, then destiny becomes fate. That's it. That's how it is. That's what can I do? Look, I'm short, and short people can't make it, or what? Those kind of things. Those are disempowering, helplessness kind of processes. And the moment that you go into disempowerment, the immune system goes into helplessness. There's studies that show that when a person feels helpless, also with animals, you can do the same thing. They reduce the population of natural killer cells, which are very powerful cells that fight pathogens and even precancer cells. Not only does the population go down, but the strength of the reaction of the natural killer cells goes down just by the perception of helplessness.
So claiming that sense of agency is really, really key. Then how do you turn into a practice day to day to sort of cultivate these four different qualities and orientations in your consciousness?
First, you do an assessment of what you're doing that you think you have no choice, and beginning to look at the choices that you have. And then you can differentiate between agency, choice, and the consequences for the choices. So for example, you're in a job that you hate, and the person will say, I hate my job. I can't quit. Why not? Oh, because I'm very close to retirement. Well, there, what you're doing is what Heidegger and other philosophers said, that you're being inauthentic. What you're doing is you're saying, I have no say in this. I have no agency in this. So the authenticity comes with either I am quitting this job and I'll figure out what I'm going to be doing for retirement, or I am going to be aware that I chose this job and I'm going to be creative to see how much pleasure I can get out of my job, because the other perception does not allow you to see pleasure. It'll kill the pleasure meter because you're saying, I hate my job. And you're in what I call presenteeism. You're just there in presence, but not in consciousness. So that's one of the examples. And when you start looking at what am I doing in my life that I think I have no control, basically what you're doing in many of them is saying, I have control, but I don't like the consequences of the control.
That's a really important distinction. Well, I know you were going to take us on a bit of an experiential process where we can look at how do we alter an area of our life and move into that kind of agency that leads to longer term resilience and healthy longevity. So why don't we take some time to do an experiential practice now?
All right. What I do is what I call the theater of change. And I bring in some very good Tibetan Buddhist psychology and some very good Western neuroscience and cultural neuroscience. So you can't change things intellectually. Otherwise, I would say, don't be depressed. It's a pretty day. Oh, okay, I won't be depressed. It's not an intellectual process. And it's not an affirmation where I'm a good person, I'm a good person. That's not how it works. That's not how you create neural maps. You have to go to a level where you're turning off all the noise, the brain noise, and it's not hypnosis or anything like that, but basically you start with teaching your body to relax, and we'll do the technique, using the mind-body code, not I want to relax. That doesn't work either. Intellect doesn't work there. Once you begin to turn on the relaxation response, you go to the next level, which is the Tibetan Buddhist and many of the meditations, which is one-pointed meditation. And what you're doing is you're quieting the mind as well as getting the body to relax. And then you go to a contemplative state, which is no longer focusing on anything, but is observing the observation. And then you're ready to go to the theater of change. So it's specifically about a cognitive technique, but using the best of Eastern and Western science. So we can do one, for example. Let's do one on finding something that you're doing that you think you have no control over. And we'll differentiate between not having control and not wanting to deal with the consequences. So instead of saying, I'm going to relax, that's not going to work. What you do is what is the mind-body code for relaxing? First, you notice that your back is touching something solid, or that your back is against something solid. And that is the mind-body code from many hundreds of thousands of years that you're protected, that you're beginning to relax. You don't have any danger behind you. The other one is that you feel what you're sitting on and be aware that something is holding you. And that's the mind-body code that says, I don't have to hold my body with my muscles. My brain can let the muscles go and melt into the chair. Then 3 things you can do to begin the relaxation response. And that is, number 1, you drop your shoulders and sends a signal to the brain because you're Shoulders go up as soon as you get tense. You drop your shoulders, one of the signals. Unclench your teeth, another signal. Close your eyes and let your eyelids fall softly over your eyes, another signal. That begins the relaxation response. We go to the next level. The next level is a one-pointed meditation. And what you do with your eyes closed, what you can do is you can either use a word, a mantra, love, or you can use something that's really very effective is heart math breathing, which is that you breathe as if you're breathing from your heart. That has two purposes. One, it's a focusing. And two, when you're thinking or when you're experiencing that you're breathing from your heart, it causes, and there's quite a bit of research behind this, it causes a coherence between brain and heart rate variability and the waves of the brain, and that brings coherence between mind and body. So you can do that, and you can just imagine you're breathing from your heart, inhaling and exhaling. And it's usually around from the chest, go a little bit to your left, and that's where you look. And that kind of technique allows you to focus, to quiet the mind, but also to get coherence between mind and body. And when you do this on your own, you can do it as long as you want to. We'll make it as brief so that you can learn the technique and then practice it on your own. That is the other level. The third level, which is the contemplative, you move away from paying attention to a word or the heart breathing, and you observe what's going on. If your eyes are closed, you're observing something dark, and that is a dark screen. And what you're doing is you're watching what's going on without trying to bring anything in or get anything out. It's like you're watching the clouds go by or a river or a film. You're the observer of the observation. And you do that just observing. Something comes in, you don't try to get rid of it. You watch it go in, and you go back to watching the film, back and forth. And that gets you into a contemplative state beyond the one-pointed meditation. And you can do that as long as you want to. The more you practice it, the better you become, just like anything else. Then we go to the theater of change. And what you do there is you imagine, you can see it in your mind, or you can imagine it, that you're going into what I call the theater of change. And that is a little theater that you own. Nobody can get in. And you are the director, you're the main character, and you're the scriptwriter. And that's really how we deal with the world. We create our theaters, and we perceive the world as if it's the world, but it's really our theater. So this metaphor is really powerful. So you imagine yourself that you're in that theater, and the director says to you, okay, you are the main character here, and I want you to go back. This main character is looking into what are the things that you think are out of control in your life, and pick one. You go back, what are my mostly out of control? And you identify, am I out of control? Or if I make an authentic decision, if I bring agency in, will I not be able to live with the consequences or not want the consequences? So for example, you are out of control because you don't exercise. Well, I can't exercise. It's just if I exercise, then it's going to take a lot of time. That is a disowning of agency. And exercise might mean that you're going to have to hurt for a while, or exercise might mean that if you look better, you may not be able to handle it because of your self-esteem. So it's a process. So pick one and begin to look at it as, how can I take agency here? And I'm going to decide, if I don't want to change it because I don't like the consequences, then how can I make this as pleasurable, as meaning as possible, because I chose for this to happen. So imagine yourself living that way. Now imagine yourself living with the ownership of what you chose, whether getting out or staying in, and embody it. Embodiment is a very important component in the theater of change. Embodying means, where does it land in your body? That feeling of the agency, where does it land? Breathe into it and allow it to be you in the world. And that creates the neural maps for the consciousness shift. You do that, and then I'll count from 1 to 5, and you can do it as long as you want. I'll count from 1 to 5. At the end of the count, I'll tell you what the next step is. So now we'll go from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When you open your eyes, look around to see if you notice any kind of novelty, something that you hadn't seen in the room, something that you hadn't noticed before. The moment you do that, you go into mindfulness. And coming out of a state of contemplation is good to go into mindfulness. And that's what mindfulness is, aware of novelty. You do that. Then, in order to complete the process at the neuropsychological level, you want to live as if you are that person already. So if you decided to change what you're going to change, you do it. If you decided that you don't want the consequences, then you change the perception of what the place or what the thing is, and you begin to live it. You do it for a few weeks, neural maps will change, and you'll have a new perception, but also your biology will follow. Your biology won't be inconsistent between what you want and what's going on. So that's one example of one of the things we can do.
There's a lot in there to unpack, and it seems like the basic trajectory is to kind of give yourself a more fully, embodied experience that then reprograms your brain, including with the actions afterwards. So you inhabit the scene. I think that's probably why you use theater, because you're inhabiting the scene that you're wanting to live into rather than just thinking about it or wishing it happens.
Yes, and the Greeks used to use the theater. The theater in Greek means behold, to actually intervene with illnesses and other things. So it's a theater that we're creating. But for example, you can do a functional MRI. You can see people on an MRI on real time, and you can have them think about things and have affirmations, and you'll see some neurons firing together, and you can see a little bit of a neural map, but it doesn't last, because movement and the senses, the actual embodiment, is what allows the neural maps to get strong. And the good news is that the neural maps that you don't use, the old scripts, begin to lose their power. Although every once in a while they'll come in to kind of regain power, you tune them out and you go back to the new one, and gradually you shift your consciousness within 6 weeks.
It seems like it's a very forward-looking approach. So you're not really, delving into so much of the history of why you might have a belief system or a pattern in your consciousness. It's a little bit more just like, what do you want to create moving forward, and how do you script that into your biology? It sounds like.
Yes, and part of it, with the course that I'm going to be teaching, I'll be expanding on some other issues, and that is that we have to developmentally go back and see where we learned that. Not psychoanalytically. Where did we learn? Where did I learn, for example, to sabotage myself? And how was it functional at the time? And how is it not functional at the time? Anything that you do initially has a function. It loses a function, and that's when it begins to cause problems. And then I talk about archetypal wounds, 3 wounds, just like I found the way centenarians are. I found 3 ways that the culture will wound you, either with abandonment, shame, or betrayal. So you have to find out what the wound is. And one of these parts that I'll be talking about in the course is that I'll be helping you identify what the wounds are and what are the antidotes. So for example, one of the wounds, shame, which is used extensively, even in the corporate world, we know now from psychoneurology research that shaming causes inflammation. So if you have been shamed, you carry that with you, and you carry the shaming consciousness, which then tells the mind body that there has to be some molecules of inflammation. So we will go back and see developmentally, and to be aware that you were very smart. Even if you did something that was wrong, you're very smart because it had a function at the time. So if you were, for example, physically abused or verbally abused or sexually abused, you had to develop a sense of helplessness. You had to be submissive because it was the only way you could survive, somebody bigger than you, stronger than you. But if you take that consciousness to a time where you're no longer needing to be submissive, that's when it becomes an illness. That's when it becomes dysfunctional for you.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting what you said about shame leading to inflammation. So in a very real way, then, shame causes disease downstream, then it sounds like, unless you intervene and reclaim your agency to script something different.
It can actually, it may not cause it, but it can certainly enhance the expression of it. For example, I've worked with several hundred women with fibromyalgia. It's an autoimmune illness, not necessarily autoimmune in that the immune system fights itself, but it's an inflammatory. 99% have had some kind of a shaming wound, some kind of pro-inflammatory kind of wound. And if you don't deal with that, it's not going to get any better because the illness was learned to a certain degree. Now, it's not your fault. You never blame yourself for being sick. What you do is you ask yourself, what am I doing to enhance the illness? And what can I do to reverse or to diminish the effect of the illness?
I know that you also want to talk a little bit about how our brain and immune system are actually culturally formed. I'd love for you to share a little bit more about that whole, it builds upon what you've been sharing here today, but I think it sounds like it goes deeper.
Yes. Yes, and I like to do that because a lot of people will talk about, okay, the mind and body communicate and your thoughts and your words, but where does that come from? And that's where anthropology comes in. I bring a lot of cultural anthropology into my work in biocognition. Let's go back. We're Homo sapiens, and we're basically about 150,000 years old. We came from the Cro-Magnons and so forth. But around 40,000 years ago, maybe 50,000 years ago, something happened and we developed a consciousness. And we know that the consciousness was developed because people started burying their dead. That requires a tremendous amount of ability to abstract. And they were burying their dead, putting trinkets and things that are important for the people that died. So it was another concept of what's important to them in this life might be important in another life. That was an important component of consciousness. The second is that language was developed. So you had tremendous ability to discern with your senses, and you pass that on epigenetically, which means that whatever you learn in the environment, you pass it on to the next generation. So the senses were really very good, and you pass that on. But then you didn't have to smell a lion 300 feet away. You could say, there's a lion there. So the brain had to learn the biosymbols of there's a lion there, as opposed to I smell the lion. So then the words became biosymbolic. And when they became biosymbolic, then words have meaning that can hurt you just like pathogens. So then you can say, why are you so stupid? Those are words. That's blah, blah, blah. Those are words. And yet the immune system responds as if there's some kind of pathogen there, and you begin to secrete other molecules of inflammation. So we're a bioinformational field because of the way we develop our consciousness.
Well, fascinating. Well, there's so many threads that you're weaving together and really opening up a whole new perspective on how to age really gracefully and beautifully and in a way that really leads to high quality of life. So I want to spend some time talking more explicitly about your upcoming program, because we really aim at Shift not to just inspire people with some interesting ideas, but really to make profound shifts in your life, that we want your life to be better. And Dr. Martinez clearly has an extraordinary background of studying the best thinking on this, integrating the modern science, psychology, mindfulness, and really understanding how you can really design your life in a way that allows you to be healthy and thriving, even over 100. So the program that we are offering with Dr. Martinez is called 4 Longevity Factors of People Who Live Happily and Healthy to 100 Plus. Discover how cultural beliefs are more powerful than genetics. You can find it laid out in detail at the URL agingbeliefs.com, agingbeliefs.com, and it really is addressing the whole topic of aging on the consciousness level. This is a way to intervene in those patterns that might be taking you down a pathway you don't want to go on, and help to shape a pathway where you're the agent of your own destiny path, and that you are really sculpting your life and belief system in a way that leads to optimum results. So again, you can find all the details at agingbeliefs.com. But Dr. Martinez, I'd love for you to share in your own words, like, why take this journey with you? What is the benefit of spending 7 weeks and really getting the foundations of this built in your life?
First, because it turns conventional science upside down. Conventional science is reductionistic, and it tells you this is how it is. This is what's going to happen. This is going to happen to you in your life. And what this is doing, this is saying, no, we have something new here. The Earth is not the center of the universe. The sun is the center of the galaxy. So it's a paradigm shifting model, but with methods and ways of changing it. It's not just talking about the platitudes and generalities. It's giving you methods to neuropsychologically change, psychoimmunologically change the way that you perceive the world and how your biology is going to follow. So If you're interested in, this is not for people over a certain age, it's for everybody. I've had courses that people in their 20s join, because the earlier you get it, the longer you have of a happy life. So it's basically shifting from the conventional thinking of helplessness into a new way of empowering yourself with methods that allow you to see the changes in your life.
Fascinating. Well, I'll just read out the module titles so you can give us a little sneak preview of what's coming. So module 1, how mind and body communicate in cultural contexts.
Here, briefly, what I'll be doing is I'll be giving the language, the terrain of what we're going to be doing. So we're going to be shifting from thinking about boundaries into horizons, thinking about changing behavior into changing the terrain that keeps the meaning of the behavior, looking at co-authors, who are the people that support what you want and not what you want, who were your cultural editors. So as a language, as a lexicon that you learn to then speak the language, because a new paradigm has to have new language. So it'll be basically preparing the language that we're going to be using, creating the cognitive maps in order for you to understand what I'm going to be doing.
Module 2, archetypal wounds, their antidotes and the immune system.
The archetypal wounds are very, very important. Most people have them. Some people can work them on their own. Archetypal wounds, as I mentioned earlier, are abandonment, shame, and the betrayal. They each have a temperature. They have a psychoneurological correlation. They also have not a cause, but a correlation with some illness. And the antidotes are ways of changing those responses to the wound. So, for example, I'll use one, shame, which has been studied the most. Shame is inflammatory. Clinically, I've been able to show that creating an honor consciousness, which is the antidote, begins to change the process of that chronic inflammation. So you'll learn and identify if you have an archetypal wound, and what are the antidotes, and how can you begin to live the antidotes, especially in relationships. People come into relationships not knowing that they bring these things in, and then they hurt each other with a particular archetypal wounds without knowing that they're doing that to themselves.
Module 3, the first centenarian factor, aging consciousness.
The aging consciousness will be understanding where you learned your way of perceiving time and space, how has it served you, how has it not served you, and how can we begin to change then that centenarian consciousness into your life, and allowing you then to see that whether you're 50 or 100, that you have all the time in the world and the perception of what you're going to be doing. So it's very important to understand that you have to assimilate the factors that centenarians are living. And we'll be able to do it with techniques and methods of understanding why you may not be making these changes. And the whole idea of this course is to teach you that the things that you thought were not possible, in many cases, because you didn't have the right tools. And the tools of centenarian consciousness of time and space is going to be what we're going to be doing in that particular module.
Module 4, the second centenarian factor, time consciousness.
The time consciousness will be, how much are you living? We assess that. How much are you living in the urgent present? And the urgent present teaches your body gastrointestinal problems, hypertension, reflux, all these things, because you're not giving time for the system to support itself. Are you eating with your laptop? Things like that. So it'll be a way of assessing what is your perception of time, and where do you see yourself in the culture portal? Do you see yourself as middle-aged? You see yourself as old, senior citizen, whatever? And we get out of that and we go into what I call agelessness consciousness. And you stop telling your age, so you stop getting pegged into the portals.
The third centenarian factor, health consciousness.
The health consciousness would be to define with good science the myth of family illness as being a genetic sense. It is a propensity. It is a way of perceiving the world that triggers in the propensity for it to happen, and ways of finding how you can come out of that. How can you improve? In some cases, you can't change the illness, but you can certainly improve the situation. There's research by Ellen Langer and others, a colleague at Harvard, who's found that context, cultural context, has a lot to do with, for example, how much insulin you need if you're diabetic type 2, or if you are a chronic pain. The context will have a differentiating effect. So we're going to identify that, and we're going to identify how to change, always with methods and always with science to back it up.
Module 6, the fourth centenarian factor, self-love consciousness.
Self-love consciousness is going to be a lot of fun because our culture teaches to have a mixed message about who we are. Succeed, be good, be the best you can, and then when somebody acknowledges it, deny it or diminish it. I love your shirt. Oh, it's an old shirt. You're killing the possibility for immune enhancing with serotonin, endorphins, oxytocin, and what you're doing is an old shirt. It's a shaming. So what are you doing? You're creating a little bit of inflammation. So self-love is extremely important. And self-love is something that needs to be worked out, not in a narcissistic way. And I'll give examples like, for example, one 102-year-old woman who was beautiful. I said, "You're beautiful." And she said, "Oh, thank you. I've always been beautiful. Ever since I was a little girl, I was beautiful." That kind of consciousness. And then you give people permission to not like what you're saying. If they think you're a narcissist or conceited, that's okay. You're going to live longer than they are. You don't have to boast. You just have to take the opportunity to accept the gratitude, which is a real good immune enhancer.
Great. And finally, Module 7, creating subcultures of wellness, supporting outlier life beyond the pale.
That's extremely important. And I'll tell you why. In my work and also Ellen Langer's work at Harvard, Ellen Langer's a brilliant researcher, we find that if you don't have a subculture of wellness, after you learn some methods, after you have some therapeutic gains, you lose them within a few weeks, including the anti-aging kinds of things. So what we're going to do is we're going to teach how to create a subculture of wellness, how to create a subculture that supports your individualism, that supports your new way of thinking. And when we have the breakout groups, I'm going to give some anthropological ways for people to bond and to create the connections. And a subculture of wellness is not people that think like you, people that respect what you think. And having that then allows you to support it because the research is showing that you can gain all kinds of things. And if you go back to the fishbowl, you're going to lose it. And that would be a shame. So we have that as one of the components to make sure that what you learn will grow and will be enhanced and also be a model for other people for hope.
Well, you've designed this course so beautifully to really lay those foundations and create the network, the communities of support. So really great stuff. So let me share a few other things about the program. Again, you can see all the details laid out at agingbeliefs.com. You get not only the 7 90-minute sessions with Mario, which includes interactive exercises and Q&A time. There's recordings of every session, both video and audio, as well as word-for-word transcripts. Now, because there's a lot of good scientific information, it's helpful to have the transcripts and the video and audio. You can go back and reference very specific practices and really build those into your life. There's also small group time to connect with other participants, as well as weekly exercises for home and a Facebook community to support your journey. On the page, you also see a number of extra bonuses that enhance the core value of the journey. There's a video dialogue with Mario and Marabina Jaimes called Expanding Ceilings of Abundance. Want to share anything about that?
Yes, that was a lot of fun to put together. Marabina is an award-winning actress and producer, Emmy Award winner. And what we're going to talk about is what I call the ceilings of abundance, especially in Hollywood. Many people make it and do really well. As in Nashville, where I live, they do really well. And then something happens with the ceilings of abundance that they begin to sabotage themselves and they begin to feel unworthy about what they're doing. For example, we have horizons in our culture. And one horizon would be when the train was invented, the fastest that you could go was as fast as a horse could go, which is maybe 30 miles an hour. And the doctors would say, well, the body was made for that. Can't go further than that. So then the train was invented, which went up to 50, 60 miles an hour. And people were developing what's called rail back disorder, which means that you're going too fast. The body wasn't made for that. So see, that's a horizon that needed to be broken. Gradually, it was worked out and assimilated. Well, now we go 600 miles on a plane and nothing happens. Otis, when he invented the elevator, you go up and down, and you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to go through the stairs, and people were having nosebleed. How many people have nosebleed now? So those are the cultural horizons, but we have individual horizons also that need to be addressed. And I'll show you some methods of how to actually assimilate and increase the ceilings of abundance so you can do well without getting sick or without sabotaging yourself.
Some fascinating examples there, and really what a great extra bonus. So that's worth the investment alone in the program. There's a number of other ones on the page as well. There's an excerpt from The Phoenix Self in Search of Methuselah, Dr. Martinez's groundbreaking book. There's a video dialogue with him and Baisakhi Saha called How Cultures Shape Our Self-Valuation and Sense of Worthiness. And then there's a special 5 extra bonuses actually that come from our Science of Healing Summit. This is the preeminent global online summit every year, really features some of the pioneers in consciousness science. It includes people like Shamini Jain, Greg Braden, Bruce Lipton, and Paul Mills, all getting access to specific methodologies of healing that can enhance your journey and growth. So you get those from our 2021 summit when you sign up by midnight tonight. So it's our little extra enticement for you to make a decision now while you have the most information. So this is going to be an amazingly valuable and practical program with a lot of good science and practices that have been proven to work. We've kept the investment really accessible. It's just 3 payments of $109 or save 10% when you pay in full with 1 payment of $297. So the course starts March 28th, and I encourage you to go over to the page at agingbeliefs.com, give it a read, tune in, and if you're getting a yes to move forward, there's really no risk since there's a money-back guarantee of your satisfaction. So the course sessions are going to be on Mondays at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 Eastern, but even if you can't make the live times, you can still get the full value with the recordings, the transcripts, and the community as well. So there's a lot of great testimonials on the page from people like Larry Dawsey. You're really going to be in great hands with Mario because he knows what he's talking about. He's really studied it, and he's really worked with the methodologies to make profound shifts a reality and to really rewire yourself for a healthy, vibrant, long, and fulfilling life. Mario, anything that hasn't been said, you just want to speak to folks who are considering going further with you on this journey?
Yes. When I went to Poland, I'm a consultant there. They have state-of-the-art work. They look at your chronological age and your biological age, and they do epigenetic blood work and all kinds of things. So the director said, well, you've been studying this for so long. Let's see how it works for you. So they did all the work, and they found that I'm 21 years younger than my chronological age. So I'm living it, and I want to share it with you so you can live it yourself.
Fantastic. Well, Mario, it's been a pleasure and delight to spend this time with you and really learn so much. So thank you, and thank you all for joining us. And let's really take this research that Dr. Martinez has gathered and put it to practice in our lives. So our course is a great way to do that, and it's called 4 Longevity Factors of People Who Live Happily and Healthy to 100 Plus. Discover how cultural beliefs are more powerful than genetics. And you can sign up and get those extra bonuses by midnight tonight at agingbeliefs.com. So thank you so much. Thank you all for joining. Many blessings, and look forward to seeing many of you in the program.
Pleasure.